City Hall.
Good evening, everyone. I'm opening the Eugene City Council work session, and we are here this evening with the Eugene Water and Electric Board. I suppose you need to open your meeting as well.
I do. I'd like to open the September 12th, 5:30 work session of the Eugene Water and Electric Board in the joint meeting with Eugene City Council.
I want to welcome our guests and welcome everyone who's here and at home, and welcome our council back from their semi-vacation, right? And then very quickly, we get to be on TV all the time. You guys don't. So you will just have to make sure everybody knows who you are. So you all introduce yourselves to the public.
I will. I'll start with our General Manager, Roger Gray, and if we can just go around, please.
I'm Roger Gray, General Manager of eWeb.
Lance Robertson, Public Affairs Manager, eWeb.
Rich Cunningham, eWeb Board.
John Brown, eWeb Board.
John Simpson, eWeb Board.
Bob Cassidy, eWeb Board.
Joanne Ernst, eWeb Board.
Great. I think you know all of us, right? So, and we are pretty familiar to the audience out there, I think, as well. So anyway, we'll proceed. And so our first item up this evening is, and we're very glad to be having this, we're going to be we're going to review the agenda, and so you can see that we're going to be doing first the smart meter discussion, and then we're going to do the climate initiative coordination discussion, and then we will have an open discussion meeting to do any follow-up conversations that people want to have. And then I believe after we finish that at approximately 6:45, we have a little birthday party planned for one of the members here. So it would be the one with the red face over there.
More normally so.
So anyway, that's the plan, okay?
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
If I may, Mayor Piercy and members of the council, thank you very much for having us again this year. I'm hoping that we can do this more than once a year, because I think it's really good to not only have the open communication, but the personal dialogue at the table. It really helps us talk about areas of commonality and where we can benefit and do more with less that everybody has. The first agenda item this evening that we're going to discuss, Roger Gray, our General Manager, and Lance Robertson are going to talk to you about the smart meters, where we're going, what we're seeing, and go from there. So, Roger, thank you.
Thank you, President Brown, and thank you, Mayor Piercy, councilors, commissioners, Ms. Maderi. We're here to do a presentation on smart meters, so I'm going to just thank you for the lights there. Proceed. So what is a smart meter, first of all? This is a traditional meter. I'll pass this around. This is a traditional meter that you would find in your house today. It's an electromechanical meter. It's been around for decades. Not this particular one, but it's been around. The technology's been around for decades. Smart meter is a digital version of this. It's basically a computer that can communicate with the utility, and it can possibly communicate with devices in the utility or in the customer's home. So I'll just pass those around. I'll take the digital one this way. I've taken the digital one apart. We also plan to do water meters as well if we go forward with the smart meter program. Why are we considering looking at smart meters? So the potential benefits are as follows. One, we normally need to replace infrastructure, including meters, and so it would be part of a normal infrastructure replacement. We're also looking at operational efficiencies. Smart meters can be remotely read as opposed to having meter readers walk around neighborhoods and drive to collect meter readings. And we can also start and stop service remotely, which is a very high cost. So it's a technology for labor operational efficiency. Of course, labor is an important issue. And in addition to the labor savings, there is about 15,000 gallons of fuel savings per year. This is no secret that we've been looking at this for some time at eWeb. The meter readers are well aware of this, and we're already working with them on retraining. Several have already gone through programs of retraining, so we don't expect this to be a pink slip program. We expect that the meter readers will go into different kinds of eWeb jobs. In addition to the the traditional infrastructure replacement, smart meters are part of what is, it's a critical part of what is called a smart grid. It is basically taking the utility industry and moving it into the 21st century. It's basically digitization of the utility. The technology we've used for meter reading and meters have not changed much for decades, and this is where most of the country and many other countries are going right now. In addition to digitizing and being a part of the smart grids, there's a so what factor. This will allow us to better integrate renewable resources such as wind up there. Wind is what's called a variable resource, and unlike traditional utility resources which are controllable, wind is not controllable. So smart meters and smart grid will let us integrate more and more variable resources. Other variable resources are things like solar. Smart meters will also help us better adapt and integrate and allow for electric vehicles to come in. Electric vehicles have a lot of promise for our utility as well as for our nation. They have a potential huge benefit to helping us with on the greenhouse gas emissions as we substitute electricity for fossil fuels. But there'll be a very large challenge to integrate electric vehicles into the grid that we know today. And we're hoping that smart meters and innovative pricing structures will allow us to create incentives for people to charge their vehicles, hopefully in the middle of the night, as opposed to at 5 p.m. when everybody comes home. We've been looking at smart meters for some time now, well before I became to eWeb last May. And from eWeb's experience and many other utilities that we have visited, plus my personal experience with other utilities before, there are sort of what we call the big 5 issues of concern. And they really are health and safety, and specifically the concern that emerges there is about the radio frequency, or RF, which I'll refer to. The privacy and surveillance aspects. There's some people are concerned about the privacy aspects of whether the data will be used to surveil them. The security aspect is the concern about the grid being hacked and being manipulated through by people. There's a 4th area of accuracy. Are the meters accurate? And then what we call a 5th area, which really emerged as one of the major areas. Surprisingly, the number 1 there did not emerge in our focus groups earlier this year. The number 5 there is control in the Big Brother. There is a concern about the utility controlling devices in the home, for example. And that is not necessarily part of the program. It doesn't need to be. I personally suspect that the aspect of utilities working with customers will be on a subscription basis as opposed to a mandatory control basis. Our current business case does not rely on any case on Big Brother mandatory participation in control of devices in the home, such as a thermostat or things like that. So I'm going to focus a little bit on that first one because there's been some concerns not raised in the focus groups, but in the community in general, about radio frequencies, or RF. And put to RF in context, there's RF all around us. We have smartphones, many of us, or cell phones in general. We all have, for decades, have been receiving radio frequencies in the form of AM and FM transmissions into our homes, into our businesses, and everywhere you walk. Many of us have the device up there in the center, the blue with the antennas is a wireless router. It's very common. There are currently, we are exposed to, I'm counting about 8 or 9 wireless routers that I can pick up signal for in this room on my smartphone. And then on the upper right there is a cordless phone that some of us have in our homes. The wireless routers and the cordless phones operate very typically in the same radio frequencies that smart meters would be operating in. And then finally there's some towers there. There's a combination of cell phone towers, and there's one that's a little bit hard to see in the lower left is a combination microwave and radio tower. For example, police and fire, public safety uses radio transmissions as well for their public safety radios. We handed around the smart meter, and if you take it apart, you can see there's a little antenna in there. It's a silver bar there, and then there's a radio unit in there. There is, in some cases, 2 radio units, a radio unit that communicates back to the utility, and potentially a second radio unit that would communicate to devices in the home via what's called a home area network, or a HAN. We have not determined whether there will be a HAN or home area network in the eWeb smart meter program. Part of the reason why we're going to evaluate that or part of what we're doing now is the pilot to determine what is the value and customer reception or interest in that kind of device. This next graph is from a report that was done in California over concern of smart meters. This was performed by the California Council of Science and Technology. And this puts in perspective the relative RF exposure of different devices. The large bars on the left are cell phones that would be typically held at your ear. And then the next ones down are microwaves. There's a couple of smart meter ones at 1 foot and 2 feet. This assumed a 50% what's called duty cycle, and we don't even conceive of a duty cycle of anywhere near even 1%. More like 0.01% would be a typical duty cycle of a smart meter. And then you've got the wireless routers and the AM and FM and TV broadcasts that have been exposed to for decades. We believe that the eWeb smart meter, if it's deployed and used the way that we would expect to use it, will be far less exposure than even a wireless router.
That's unimpeded feet. So, like, if there's a wall between it, it's significantly different.
Councilor Zanko, this study assumed basically unimpeded. So there are several things that influence radio frequency. There's a combination of things. Let me just go to 2 slides from now. I'll cover that right now. There's the following things really influence radio frequency. One is the distance. The second is the amount of power that is emitted, and then the duration. These are all factors. And then the other factors would be things like walls, metal, and things that might impede that. So signals drop off as they go through glass walls and things like that. So the combination of these things are what our primary regulator of radio frequencies is the FCC, and they have a whole series of regulations about what a person can be exposed to, and it's a function of distance, all these things. And there are standards that are measured in microwatts per centimeter, and they're also measured in watts per kilogram, so which are the primary human things that we look at for radio frequencies. So the FCC, the smart meters have to conform to the same FCC standards as any wireless device would, and they go through the same testings and requirements as other wireless devices. I'm going to go back here to the slide here on putting radio frequency spectrum. This is the electromagnetic spectrum that goes from, and if you can see the line, it's kind of blown out there on the upper part. That's the radio frequencies and TV frequencies. And then on the lower bar that's broken out there, it's visible light. And then to the right of visible light, you have ultraviolet, and to the left of visible light, you have infrared. And these are, of course, several of these spectrum in high enough dosages. For example, UV, which is from sunlight, for example, and a high enough dosage that would cause a health problem. Visible light in high enough dosages would cause health problems. Of course, X-rays are in very limited dosages. That's why they're so highly regulated. So all these things, again, are regulated by the FCC in terms of the kinds of exposure we have. So this, I call this graph of maybe this is the inverse of the traditional. The traditional perspective is what you can't see won't hurt you. This is one where I think that what we can see we perceive as not hurting us, but what we don't see we worry about. And I'm going to turn over to Lance next for the next couple of slides here on how we're going to approach smart meters.
Yeah, I'd like to just give you a brief overview of what we plan for our communication and community engagement. So, as Roger mentioned, smart meters have been around for a while. We've actually had the opportunity to learn from other utilities. There's probably at least 10 million, probably more like 20 million smart meters deployed around the country so far. So we've had the opportunity to learn from the experiences of other utilities. This is probably a case where going first isn't a good thing because there have been issues, as Roger mentioned, with other communities. And by and large, those have been issues that have cropped up because the community or the utility has not been transparent, has not been forthcoming with facing some of these issues and dealing with them. So that's our approach, is to face those head on, to be thoughtful and transparent about how we tackle the communications. And we believe that providing credible, honest, and useful information to the customers is really what's going to be beneficial to us as a utility, because we know that if we can present that information, we believe that there'll be broad community acceptance of smart meters as a a tool for our community and for the utility. So we are really at the front end of our communications and public outreach effort. We've got about at least a year, maybe 18 months before we have full deployment. So we have quite a bit of an opportunity to engage the community and help get feedback from the community about what they're interested in as far as smart meters and what possible concerns that they might want to have. As Roger mentioned, we did do a focus group. That was one of our first engagement opportunities right out of the blocks. There were a couple of concerns, as he mentioned. The biggest concern was Big Brother and the jobs issue. RF really was not an issue in the focus group. And we are just at the front end of getting ready to deploy a pilot project, which I'll talk about in the next slide. But the pilot project really is going to give us an opportunity to engage those customers and get feedback from those customers. We really have a three-phase approach. Really, for the next 6 months, we're engaged in what I would call Smart Meter 101. One of the things from the focus group we found was that a lot of customers really don't know what these things are, what they do, what their capabilities are, and we want to be able to help explain what they are to the customer. So really, it's an engagement strategy that's, at least on our end, is focused on getting the customers up to speed on what these things are, and also getting feedback from the community as well on how they want us to proceed. The second phase would be sort of that pre-deployment phase, probably from 4 to 6 months out, where we want to make sure that customers understand that these things are going to be deployed, how we're going to deploy them, if they have any questions, who they can call. And the third phase is really the rollout, the deployment. There's actually quite a communications strategy built around how we're actually going to put these things on the side of a house, swap out the old meter for the new one, and how we might engage issues such as if the customer has a question about the accuracy of their meter, how we would actually do that, how we would engage that customer and handle their perception or their viewpoint. Really, again, the key to success here is presenting accurate and credible information. We believe that if we can do that, and we can do that consistently, the customer can make up their own mind, the public can make up their own mind about the relative benefits of smart meters. Just briefly on the pilot, it's a 100-person pilot, 80 customers, 20 employees. The pilot is about 12 months long, and the goal is really to look at the customer experience. Previous pilots that other utilities have done have really tested the technology. We believe the technology has already been tested. Really, our pilot is focused on the customer experience. We want to know how customers are using these. We've even got, we'll have in-home displays similar to this that the customer can use. They'll also have a web portal that they can use and experiment around with, and we want to know what their experience is with using that technology to help monitor their energy use.
So, Lance, we got about 12 more minutes, and we're for questions.
So just briefly, next steps. Again, we're going to roll out the pilot. It'll be a 12-month project. Again, public engagement. We are going to be issuing an RFP for meter supplier at some point, and at some point, probably in early spring, our board will be asked to make a go or no-go decision related to the project.
Anything else, Roger?
That's it.
If not, then I'll open it up for questions, and I'll go ahead, George, and then George. George. Well, I don't know how you do that, but I'll just I'll say Councilor Pulling, Councilor Brown, and then Councilor Clark. How's that?
Early on in your presentation, you said that the devices can communicate, or the smart meters can communicate with devices or appliances in the home. What would be the benefit, or why would you want that to do that?
Councilor Pauling. So the meters are potentially, they have to communicate back to the utility, and they potentially, it's an option to put in what's called this home area network, where the meter can communicate with devices in the home. And so an in-home display, such as this, I'll pass this around, we might be able to send what's more real-time information to a customer so they don't have to log on to a web portal. That might be one reason to do that. Probably I think the more strategic and long-term benefit is that I personally conceive of a possibility that we will sub-meter electric vehicles and create a special rate, an incentive rate for electric vehicles, and part of that would be the ability for the utility to control that charging device. So we really want it to come on from midnight to 4 a.m. as opposed to, we really don't want electric vehicles plugged in at 5 p.m. when people get home. That would be very hard from a utility perspective. But in the middle of the night, when the wind powers up, that's an example of where we want to control that. Again, I personally believe that there'll be an opt-in, opt-out program for customers. If customers want to have the ability to charge their vehicle anytime, for any reason, they probably would have a traditional tariff.
And then when you're passing the two different meters around, the old style is pretty sturdy, pretty hefty. The smart meter is pretty much all plastics. How durable? Have there been some long-term tests done on these things to see how they're going to hold up in inclement weather and the different seasons?
Councilor Pauling, there hasn't been any long-term installations because the technology's only been around for about 4 or 5 years now. And so the plastics and the battery life is actually one of the critical components and concerns. But there has been a lot of testing through independent laboratories that expose them to weather and cycling hot, cycling cold, wet, inclement weather. And our business case assumes probably be even shorter lives than those, just to be conservative. And I think that what the real obsolescence will be is not the plastic wearing out or the battery wearing out. I think basically that these will be a device that we probably replace more frequently, like you would replace a computer in your home or business.
Speaking of that, what is the cost factor, and how is that going to be factored into the rollout of smart meters?
The business case is still under construction, and we have, right before I came to EWEB, there was a preliminary business case presented to the board about whether we should continue to study this, and there was thumbs up at that point. And as Lance indicated, we'll be going back for an update, probably a final business case sometime in the spring, which will include the public input to date, the results of the demonstration project, and it will look at the cost of the installation versus the benefits. Some of them will be hard benefits like labor savings, and some of them will be potential benefits of the future, for example, the ability to integrate EVs and wind better. And we're still putting that together. And last time I looked at it, it is not a slam dunk. We really need to sharpen our pencils very carefully for the commissioners to consider it.
So my biggest concern as far as that would be the cost to do this replacement or rollout of the new smart meters, falling on the customers themselves, and hopefully that won't take a big hit. I mean, there's already people that are having problems paying their electric bills right now. So hopefully we can work something out where it can be absorbed somehow, but not on the customer's back.
We have not yet crossed the bridge about how to finance it, whether it's going to be use of rates or reserves or debt or a combination of the three, and that will be part of the presentation to evaluate those kinds of impacts.
Thank you.
George, then Alan?
Okay, well, I just had a quick question. Now, you had mentioned that other utilities that have already done this and installed them experienced some problems, and I wasn't sure whether they were perceptual problems of the customers or whether there were actual physical problems somehow with the conversion over. So if you could just briefly what some of those problems
It's not really technical. It would be more community-based issues. For example, Pacific Gas and Electric is probably the poster child for how not to do smart meters. For example, they decided to install smart meters in the middle of summer, which is the highest sort of usage period. They didn't really engage the customers prior to installing. They just went out and installed them. There were questions about accuracy of the meter when, in fact, really might have had more to do with the customer was actually using more electricity at the time. And so there were a number of perception issues that they had to face, and we learned from that experience, but we've also learned from some other communities that have engaged their communities prior to deployment, and those seem to be the most successful rollouts.
I thought it might be like that, more of a perception thing. I think it's really important to educate people. Spend that extra time doing that to avoid big battles later.
Right.
Thanks.
And Councilor Farr, then Councilor Zelenka, then Pryor, and then Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can you tell me close to how many meter readers you employ currently?
Today we have Councilor Farr, we have today about 20 meter readers, and the approximately 3 of those have already gone on to different assignments and new jobs, and so and several of them, and I can't remember the exact figure today, have gone through retraining efforts. They're still meter readers, and we will continue to go through this effort. And so what we hope is that all meter readers will eventually have a job at eWeb, a different kind of job.
You might recall telling me that one time before. I had a meeting with you and Deborah some time ago.
Yes.
And so that was a loaded question. I heard the answer. Second, that you don't anticipate any impact on customer rates, either lowering or increasing of customer rates based upon the use of smart meters.
Councilor Farr, one of the, I think, big mistakes that many utilities have made is promising that smart meters will save the world, and the reality is that it's probably between a $27 and $33 million investment that we're going to have to make, and the question will be how to finance that, and then the benefits, like many investments, the benefits come back over time, several $1 million a year. And so if we financed it with rates, it would be an immediate, very high impact. If we finance it with debt or use of reserves, we can probably better match the benefits and the cost and create little or no rate impact. And those would be the kinds of things we look at. But the reality is what smart meters really will enable us to do is we integrate different kinds of resources and actually take conservation to the next level. It will keep us from raising rates faster than they otherwise would go up. That's probably the better way to state it, as opposed to saying we're not going to raise rates, because the reality is we do raise rates.
Well, that's certainly good news for the long
long term.
run. Yeah. And amortizing it, I guess, over time, the initial cost is, it seems like a prudent way to go. And you had stated that this is not, we don't expect this to be a pink slip job. And you kind of covered that. You've retrained 3 have been retired, perhaps, and
they've actually are in different jobs today, okay. Councilor Farr, and we what we have discussion with meter readers is that if you make a commitment to retrain and take these efforts, eWeb's going to make an equal commitment, and our expectation and hope is that meter readers will be placed into new jobs. Someone who says, I don't want to do anything different forever and doesn't want to retrain, they're not going to be in a good situation in the end. But we will make the same commitment, and several meter readers have already gone in through retraining, and I'm very happy with the results. And the rest of the organization is very pleased with meter readers coming in and helping them out. And very good workers.
So we won't see headlines saying major impact on jobs in Eugene Market then?
And the meter readers, we still have to read meters today, and the meter readers that we bring in behind these are called limited duration, and we tell them up front these are very short-term jobs potentially, so we don't expect this to be a 20, 25-year career.
Well done, thank you.
Councilor Zelenka, then Pryor.
So would this take the place of AMR, automatic meter reading?
So, Councilor Zelenka, the AMR, which was an early technology for meter readers, was called automated meter reading. That was a one-way device only. It would communicate to a meter reading device, and so there was a couple of technologies. There were some radios that could read it centrally. In some cases, people would drive a truck around the neighborhood and it would read the meters remotely. That was a one-way. The AMI, which is basically replaced AMR. No one's putting in an AMR that I know of today, is a two-way device. It potentially can communicate to the device to turn it on and turn it off when customers stop and start service, as well as potentially communicate with devices in the home. So the basic difference is one-way versus two-way.
I think I'm going to permanently think of you every time I see you as blinking. But hopefully I can get therapy and get over that. All this reminds me of the EMF, electromagnetic field issues that went on in the electric utility industry for a long time, and many people know I worked for EPUD for a long time. And the bottom line of that was we really couldn't tell exactly what the epidemiological studies were, and there wasn't any way to really quantify and get absolute certainty around the EMF effects on health effects, and we really couldn't tell if the high voltage lines were any different than the outlets that are constantly around us 24/7, and whether or not what kind of exposure that has on us. And what we ended up doing at EPUD was come up with a policy of what we call prudent avoidance, which was don't put heavy-duty power lines in around schools, don't put them near food processing facilities and things like that. And we've got so many different RF signals going around us with Wi-Fi and cell phones and all these things that the health effects are going to become even less clear because we can't isolate these different things very well. And I keep thinking back to the health effects issue and say, well, what if we knew they were, somewhat bad? What would we do differently? Would the trade-off be that clear that we would just say, we're not going to do that anymore? Would we not use cell phones anymore? Would we not use Wi-Fi? What would we do differently? And I guess it comes back to that, the prudent thing to do is the policy of prudent avoidance, which is why I asked about that, what's the proximity to the meter in terms of the signal and how it affects you. If it were me, I wouldn't be hanging around my things that created RF signals, including a smart meter, all the time. I wouldn't put my bed right on the other side of the wall of an RF meter if I could avoid it. So I think it may also impact the way that we build our houses and when we place these things too. So what's the next steps with the health effects part of this conversation?
Well, I think what we're doing is looking at what organizations have already looked at in terms of the health effects. I mentioned the report that was done in California. We evaluated that really carefully. We've looked at the World Health Organization has evaluated over 25,000 studies on RF, and they're not conclusive that it creates an adverse health effect. And so we look at that and say, what is the best thing to do as a next step? And as Councilman Zankla, as you point out, there's so many different exposures there already. For example, my number one exposure in my life is just carrying this thing around in my pocket, way more than a smart meter is ever going to supply. And as far as I think what we eWeb would like to do is basically build this into the demonstration project and make it part of the focus group discussions, and it's not for purposes of trying to add 25,001 studies to the mix, but it really is to get the feedback from the community and understanding of what the issues are, what the concerns are, and then figure out what steps, if any, need to be taken. One of the things our board has heard about, and I believe it needs to be considered, is an opt-out program. There might be an opt-out program for a customer who says, I don't want one. I don't want one on my house, and I don't want to be near one, and so they may opt out. And the question becomes, how do we deal with customers who opt out? If it's a handful, it's probably an easy decision to opt out. If we find that half of the customers say they're opting out, frankly, the business case isn't going to survive that kind of conclusion.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I'll just add, too, related to the pilot, we've got these little gizmos. That's a technical term for a EMF meter. So one of the things we're doing, as before we actually install the meter in the pilot program, we're going around and, for example, looking on the other side of the wall from where the meter is, taking a reading, trying to get that sort of relative background level, and then we can kind of pursue that through the pilot project to try to get some sense in sort of actual at the home sort of readings to where we're at least. Try to.
Are the board members in the pilot?
Mm-hmm. All five of them have signed up.
We don't see the blinking light. So,
and thanks for being so technical.
If I may, I've got two more counselors and a commissioner in the queue, and we're already over our time, so we can be and now I've got three counselors, and so Joanne, if you don't mind, I'd like to deal with counselors first. Counselor Pryor, Counselor Clark, and Counselor Taylor, please.
Yeah, just quickly, two of the big five that haven't really been gone into. The first one, kind of around the Big Brother notion. In terms of the device being able to know what's going on inside my house, when you say smart meter, we assume, well, it's smart. It knows what's going on. Would this meter be able to tell when my television is turned on?
There would have to be a lot of analytics done by a utility to figure out the patterns of different devices and everything. And so I think in theory it's theoretically possible, but we could do that today if we wanted to figure things out about the customer. And of course, what's really relevant is the privacy policies that eWeb and any utility has, Councilor Pryor, about what we would use for the data anyway. And all we would use today is the data for billing purposes, and the customer data is considered private. We don't hand it over to anybody unless they've authorized that person on their account, and that includes law enforcement unless we have a subpoena. So in theory, you could figure out patterns of usage. But if we wanted to figure out, for example, what we do want to know is for that electric vehicle, that's the one that does worry me when people come home and plug it in. I actually would love to be able to control that in some fashion through a subscription program where we offer an incentive. I don't want to go with a big brother, we're doing it to you. I'm a big believer in letting incentives and options, give incentives and options to customers. And so when they plug that electric vehicle in, I really do want to know when that's going to be plugged in and be able to control that in some fashion through incentives, because if all those electric vehicles we expect get plugged in at 5 p.m., we're going to have a lot of trouble running the utility.
I think part of the concern about the Big Brother aspect is whether or not it's voluntary or involuntary. I think folks would be concerned that if you had a device that could involuntarily either control the particular device or the flow of electricity, I think that would be their concern. And what I'm assuming is if you're talking about being able to control certain devices, those devices would have to be enabled to work with a smart meter. In other words, my television at home right now wouldn't be enabled to work with a smart meter, but some device in the future might be enabled. Is that accurate? Water heater.
It could be, in theory, we could work with the appliances of a variety of kinds or these devices that are called in-home displays. And again, they potentially can control things. The question becomes, is it voluntary or involuntary? What a smart meter and these devices ultimately will do is far less information about a customer than the cable company or phone company would know about us today. The cable companies know exactly what we watch, when we watch it, and the phone companies know who we dial and when we dial. The smart meter is nowhere near as, quote, intrusive as that model.
True. Yeah. Then the second point, and I appreciate that, I'm just really wanting to kind of get out just how Big Brother at the utility end of it, because you're right, there's folks that have a lot more information than you could ever collect. The second one is around security. Would it be possible for someone to hack a smart meter to either increase or decrease the perceived electrical use from that meter? You know, there's a lot of really smart folks out there who might, through the use of some sort of a connected device or even a wireless device, be able to hack your meter.
In theory, it's possible. I will never go out and say that an IT device cannot be hacked, but the reality of the security of a smart meter and the ability to change the usage pattern is far more secure than an existing meter, because today, if a customer pulls an existing meter, we don't know of that until we physically are out there to see it. The next meter reading. These meters, if someone was to pull it or touch it in any kind of fashion, it registers with the system immediately. In fact, there are certain utilities, their business cases, it's not ours, one of their primary benefits is dealing with energy theft, which is a very common problem, and that's not a major eWeb issue. But so that from that perspective, the meters will be far more secure than an analog meter. But in theory, like any computer system, it could be hacked, but they have very high degrees of security, very similar to the Department of Defense standards.
Great, thank you.
Sir Clark and Councilor Taylor.
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation today. This is great information. Have you estimated any percentage of leakage recovery that you'll get from the digital read as opposed to the low-level power usage stuff that doesn't quite push the electromechanical around?
I don't think we've put anything of that nature in terms of unregistered electrical demand. Electromechanical, the old analog meters are very reliable and pretty accurate. The smart meters are slightly more accurate and can probably pick up things, but I don't. That's not part of our business case. What we will pick up, and this is one of the areas that Lance talked about. I know we have meters today, particularly on the water side, that are under registering demand. The analog meters tend to wear out over time, and on the water side, because of the environment they work in, they probably tend to under-register. So when smart meters were put in and people had a lot of surprise high bills, it was a lot of those cases. There were several reasons why, but one of the primary reasons was the old meter was under-registering quite a bit.
Well, and that's kind of just what I'm looking at. If you guys have kind of looked at, I know that there have been other markets that have put AMI into place and have seen 1 or 2 points worth of difference just because an LED on your stereo doesn't quite grab enough juice to push that thing around and register. But
Most houses, Councilor Clark, have enough demand, what's called the phantom demand, or going all the time, because we've got so many electronics in our homes. But if you had one LED, it would be, I believe it'd be more likely to be picked up by a smart meter versus an analog meter. But those aren't going to be drivers of, that's almost an insignificant amount of demand.
You don't see a big number associated with that?
No.
Okay.
What we're hoping is the conservation programs that are enabled by these kinds of meters will be ones that allow us to take large amounts of demand off the system through
Right.
taking our conservation programs to the next step.
Have you long-term plans for variable rate structures that then can look at time of day use and create a different variable residential rate structure?
That's a possibility that we could go to different rate structures. At this point, we have not even introduced that to our board, but certainly if you wanted to do time of use meters, our time of use rates, Councilor Clark, we could not do that today with a typical residential meter because we can only register a monthly demand.
Mm-hmm.
So time of use rates, by the way, I think will be one of the primary things that encourages conservation and hopefully good electric vehicle charging. But it's one of those things we would probably, we probably would introduce the meters, let them run for a while, get people used to them before we tried to do anything. I would not recommend doing a rate change at the same time we did AMI changes. It would just be too much change at once.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
And Councilor Taylor, and then we'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any of these meters in use currently?
Councilor Taylor, in Eugene,
Yeah.
the pilot will be the first 100 are going to be put in later this month will be our first AMI meters. We do have quasi-smart meters with larger customers that communicate, but most of those communicate via traditional phone lines.
And I don't understand how this is going to lead to conservation, aside from electric cars.
Councilor Taylor, one of the most important principles of conservation is a price signal, and today we don't really have good price signals for electricity. To put it in perspective, electricity is the most volatile commodity on Earth. It makes oil look trivial in terms of its volatility. And so even in the last few months, we have seen prices go in the wholesale market from 2 cents to over $1 a kilowatt hour. That compares to about an 8-9 cent typical rate per kilowatt hour rate for residential customers. That signal today is not sent to customers at all, and there's not really a very powerful signal to conserve. And so we're hoping through different price structures, which these meters would allow, we'd have a much more powerful conservation signal sent to customers, and they'd have a much more powerful incentive to conserve electricity and to consume it even more wisely.
And you talked about it could possibly communicate with devices inside the house. Why would you want to do that?
Well, one example, Councilor Taylor, is a device that would be a charging station for an EV. We do not want, if customers want to plug their EVs in at 5:15 when they get home under a traditional mechanism, that would be fine. But we would really like to be able to control that charging to
Yeah,
midnight.
I get that, but inside the house, you said possibly.
Oh,
But if you leave your refrigerator door open, or if you go to sleep and leave your TV on all night.
I think another device would be your water heater. So a water heater typically is 20 to 25% of your total energy use inside your home.
Okay.
Water heaters right now, most of them they go on and off all day, all night, even when you don't need them. So there might be an opportunity for the customer to regulate the water heater, control their water heater voluntarily to either go on or go off at certain times, thus reducing their energy demand.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I apologize for running over, but we'll go from there. Mayor Piercy.
Flexible time, and so that's okay.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you very much.
And I think
Thank
it's a
you.
really good discussion, and I appreciate it. I guess the other thing that I would just suggest to wrap this up, and I guess you probably already thought of it, but it seems like to me as you launch this with people, precautionary would be if you really look at your conservation habits before you start this, you may end up seeing less impact on your bill and less impact on other things. So, I think there might be a front-end discussion with people about what they could do as they begin this journey that, because most of us are not really very conservation at all. We pretty much take for granted that we have an unlimited supply of everything. So I think that would be a really good way to sort of launch this, to make it cost effective for people to pay attention to what they're doing and to use this as a means to really do that hands-on conservation that we all could do right now.
Thank you, Mayor Pierce.
Thank you.
So the next item up, a great discussion, is the Climate Initiative Coordination. And in this discussion, we have the state of a key city, which is us, and eWeb efforts. And Matt McRae is going to do that. And then future opportunities, and Felicity Bing is going to do that, right? So here they are.
Great, thanks. As the Mayor said, my name is Matt McRae. I'm the Climate and Energy Analyst for the City of Eugene. I'm just going to touch really briefly on a little bit of background around our Climate and Energy Action Plan, and then I'm going to hit a couple of highlights of some of the collaborations between eWeb and the City of Eugene in implementing that plan, and as the Mayor said, Felicity's going to continue with some opportunities. For those of you who aren't aware, the City of Eugene, the City Council endorsed the Climate and Energy Action Plan in fall of 2010, so just a year ago. That had been a recommendation from the City Council in 2009 that staff go ahead and make a plan. It was endorsed unanimously, and we benefited greatly from about 10 different eWeb staff who participated in the development of that plan. There was certainly other community involvement as well. We had 75 topic specialists. We had over 500 participants at community meetings, and we had an advisory team of 11 members. Really briefly, just to give you a sense of the scale of the plan covers 6 different areas, from building and energy use, land use and transportation, food and agriculture, consumption and waste, health and social services, and urban natural resources. So it's really a pretty all-encompassing plan. I also want to mention that the City of Eugene and eWeb continue to do implementation. I'm going to hit a couple of highlights here briefly, but the implementation continues to be done between organizations at the staff level. And I also wanted to point out that both organizations have internal climate action goals and plans. The Community Climate and Energy Action Plan is aimed at the community as a whole, but both the organizations maintain their own plans looking at greenhouse gas emissions reductions in the internal operations as well. And finally, just a note that both the city and eWeb staff have been participating at the state level with state climate planning, working on the roadmap to 2020. So with that background, I'm just going to hit a couple of highlights. I do want to point out this. I'm going to hit about 3 or 4 of literally several dozen that we all discussed bringing forward to you today. So this is just a very small sampling of some of the things that eWeb and City of Eugene have been collaborating on as ways to implement the Climate Action Plan. First, affordable housing. eWeb, the City of Eugene, and HACSA, which is the Housing Authority of Lane County, have collaborated on an affordable housing energy improvements project that extends the life of existing affordable housing projects. It also reduces energy consumption, decreases utility costs, and improves living conditions for vulnerable populations. It's a really important point to make that some of the recommendations in the Climate Action Plan call out specifically vulnerable and low-income populations, and actions like this get right at those groups, helping to reduce their exposure to volatile energy prices. The partners, again, HACSA, the City of Eugene, and eWeb, ultimately awarded $594,000 in grants and incentives that was used to upgrade 160 housing units in 6 different affordable housing developments. So this is a really large-scale and broad effort. Also on the affordable housing side, the City and eWeb are providing funding and technical support for Eugene's first affordable housing project that will be testing an innovative passive house approach. The 54-unit Stellar apartments that will be constructed by St. Vincent de Paul will be benefiting from assistance from both the City of Eugene and eWeb. One of the apartment buildings that St. Vincent will be building is going to be constructed to a passive house standard, and the others will be built to an Earth Advantage standard. This really gives a unique opportunity for us to measure the differences, the different benefits and costs of the different construction styles, because otherwise the buildings will be similar. So we can weigh the costs and benefits of those 2 different styles. On another note, as far as collaborations, again, the City of Eugene and eWeb collaborating on education and outreach. Upcoming in September is the 4th annual Solar and Green Building Tour. this is something that the two organizations have been partnering on since it began. The tour showcases examples of sustainability in building and inspires action among residents. It specifically targets energy efficiency, renewable energy, and resource conservation. And as I understand it from my colleagues, the demand for this tour has been nearly overwhelming, that every year there are more and more people interested in taking this tour. This year will be the first year that Bring will be joining the partnership to help out with this tour. And if you're looking for something to do this Sunday, the 18th, you can join that tour. Also, there's a Waterwise landscape demonstration garden that has been done in Alton Baker Park. It was put together with CWeb, with City of Eugene, eWeb, and several other community partners. It highlights water-saving strategies. CWeb. Uh-oh. Careful what you say. It highlights water conservation strategies specifically for household landscapes and features low water use and native plants, smart irrigation, as opposed to just average intelligence irrigation, rainwater harvesting systems. Somebody was paying attention. Good. And a bioswale and rain garden. And this particular demonstration garden provides a lasting example of not only a partnership but of innovation. This will go on to be used for the foreseeable future as an education tool, a place where people can take tours and have workshops learning about water conservation in landscaping specifically. So with that, that's the end of the highlights, and I'm going to turn it over to Felicity to talk about some opportunities.
Thanks, Matt. I'm Felicity Fahey, eWeb Sustainability Coordinator, and I must admit a sense of deja vu being back in the McNutt room. It's very nice. Nice to see everybody. So I'm going to briefly outline just a few opportunities that City of Eugene and eWeb staff see. As Matt said, there's a raft of different issues that are covered in the Climate and Energy Action Plan, but I'll be focusing on a few opportunities really around the built environment. I'll be looking at energy planning, rental housing energy efficiency, and then energy performance scores. You can see a bit of a theme through there. When I say energy, I mean electricity as opposed to fossil fuel energy. So first of all, with the energy planning, eWeb undertakes integrated energy resource planning about every 5 years, and it helps us to look ahead, kind of in a 20-year time frame, and plan for changes in both electricity demand and supply. It's really a guide to help us with electricity resource decisions. So this year, as we've done in the past, we convened an advisory panel, and that involved both City of Eugene staff and Sustainability Coordinator representative as well. The first part of the discussion we had was around energy conservation targets, and following a triple bottom line analysis and discussion with the panel, staff recommended to the board, and the board agreed, about adopting a conservation acquisition target. Don't worry too much about the numbers here, of 2.65 average megawatts per year for the next 5 years. This is up from 2.5 average megawatts set in the last IERP. The important thing about this conservation target is it really helps flatten out the demand for electricity. We are aiming to meet all new electricity demand, all new load through conservation. The rules, of course, change if a new large business comes to town. That's an entirely different game. But just with what we've been able to project with our modelling, with what we know about resource use now, we're going to be levelling off electricity use through conservation. In addition, eWeb's also going to be building its capacity around delivering demand response and peak reduction programs over the next 5 years. Some of this will be in conjunction with the AMI work that Roger and Lance have been talking to as well. To help support this work, the board has approved an additional $1 million for the next 5 years, starting from next year. The next thing I want to just briefly mention is the rental housing energy efficiency. City of Eugene and eWeb have a 20-year history around these issues, and there's some really cool things that are going on as well with new initiatives prompted by the Climate and Energy Action Plan. Over the next few months, eWeb's going to be working with partners including City of Eugene, HACSA, Rental Owners Association, to undertake some market research to see how to better get to portions of the rental market that we haven't been able to talk with yet. So looking at both renters and landlords. The real need is to look at how we get to the portion of the 32,000 rental units that don't have any weatherization or energy efficiency yet. We haven't been able to put our finger on exactly how many units. It's probably in the thousands, but we don't know how many. We've already covered a great number. Another opportunity lies in the City of Eugene rental housing code that's under review as it approaches its sunset at the end of the year. The purpose of the code, I know as the councillors are familiar with, it's really around safe and healthy rental housing. City staff are gathering input on the possibility of also including energy efficiency as part of that code, and they're exploring ways to connect property owners with people like eWeb who have the resources, who are going to be able to help people lower their energy bills. I understand that this issue is going to come before council in the fall, so I know you'll be having more discussion on it. The third opportunity I want to mention really briefly, energy performance scores. It's often referred to as EPS. I know, another acronym, it's what you really need. But this is a really interesting tool. It's been developed to help home buyers and renters know how much energy a building uses. It kind of provides, similar to a miles per gallon rating for your car. You can get a sense before you buy or before you rent how much energy use cost and the carbon emissions associated with that electricity use in your house. At the moment, eWeb offers EPS for new residential construction, and we're looking to pilot the Energy Trust of Oregon's model for existing buildings as well as soon as it's available. eWeb's also looking at EPS as the basis for offering more comprehensive energy efficiency incentives to builders, so it's more of a packaged approach, while the city's also assessing the possibility of including EPS in the green building incentive programs. So we're really looking at ways to work together to include EPS in the efficiency work that we're doing. We both share an interest in applying the model to the rental and retrofit housing segments, and are focusing on bringing attention and increasing knowledge of EPS locally as well as the rest of the state. To help do that, we're going to create a forum, probably in the fall or winter, that pulls different people together to look at EPS, to sort of pry into how it can be used, how it can be useful in our community, and how we can disseminate the information. So, while I've highlighted just a few areas we're working on collaboratively, we're really seeing those areas as some of the key places where we can increase our energy conservation and energy efficiency in the community. That need for collaboration is really heightened, especially in this tough economic climate. For example, with the state just discontinuing most of the business energy tax credits, we're really looking at finding ways to make sure that whether they be commercial property owners, landlords, are hooked up with people within eWeb or the city or whoever it might be to make sure they can take advantage of those incentives that we have.
Ready for questions? We'll call in you a minute, Bob. I guess what I wanted to say is that I think these are very exciting, both what you've got going and what you are intending to do or on the forefront of doing. I think those are wonderful projects, and I look forward to hearing how they go as you move forward. It'd be nice to get sort of intermittent reports on how each of those things are sort of moving along in the year ahead. So Commissioner Cassidy, then Councilman Zelenka, Councilor Brown.
I would just like to comment that there's a tremendous opportunity coming up for the energy efficiency in the plans for the building of the new City Hall. We did an excellent job out at the Roosevelt site. Maybe we didn't do quite as good as the administration when we went from steam. We now use gas for energy, but we're hoping that that you focus on making the new City Hall really energy efficient.
Thank you. Councilor Zelenka?
Well, I'd like it to go one step further. I'd like the City Hall to be a net zero building, meaning it's a zero energy building, so it creates as much energy as it saves, or as it uses, I mean. Although one of the things in here was a little interesting to me, but it's in the matrix 3.1A, which is about the downtown network not being able to do net metering. Could someone explain that? to me. What's the issue?
Thank you. Councilor Zelenka, what we have today is a downtown network that needs to be replaced, and eWeb has put that in the capital plan. It was designed for a one-way flow from the grid back to a building, and it cannot accommodate what is called distributed generation or like photovoltaics on top of a roof. However, the redesigned network that we're planning will be able to accommodate a two-way flow, and we're implementing that as necessary on a case-by-case basis. For example, the LCC downtown campus will be able to do that. But this will probably be a several-year change out of the downtown network.
I actually asked for this matrix, which I think is very cool. I asked for it to see, what we're doing in the climate action plan, to see what the city's doing, what eWeb's doing, and where the integrated resource plan is covering some of these items. And I actually wanted to see where the gaps were, where we weren't getting things covered, but there aren't any, which is great. And to even better than that, there are check marks for both the city and eWeb on a lot of things, so there's a lot of cooperation, and CWeb actually exists, I think. So I'm real pleased about that, and that there is a lot of cooperation, because sometimes we don't see it, and I was hoping to see that in this matrix, and it comes out in spades. And there's some really amazing stuff in here and if anybody wants to know why eWeb and the City of Eugene have a national reputation in this area, just read this little matrix and you find out like that why we do, because there's some extremely cool stuff that's going on here that's all very cost-effective things to do. Most of it's around energy efficiency. And I think it's excellent that eWeb's actually going to meet all of its load growth through conservation. That was something people dreamed about 20 years ago, and now we're actually doing it. I'm wondering what the conversation is about going the next little increment, which is actually bending the curve down instead of flattening it out, and how much conversation the board and the staff has had about that possibility as well. Be the designated answerer,
We have not evaluated that, and so Councilor Zelenka, where that would be evaluated is the Integrated Electric Resource Plan and raising the prospect of doing conservation to go negative on load growth. It is theoretically possible, and if we go to a true smart grid, including the smart metering, and we can send price signals, I believe it is not just theoretically possible, it's practically possible at that point. And I think that what happens, though, is that we as a utility need to focus on the bill and not on rates, because as we suppress demand, what will happen is we'll increase costs at the same time we're decreasing consumption. And so we want to focus on, and the commissioners have been talking about this, is trying to compare bills and cost as opposed to rates, because rates-oriented conversations only focus on low cost, and that encourages consumption, actually.
Yeah, I've been doing this for 25 years in the electric utility business, and asked hundreds, thousands of people if they know their rates, and very, very, very few people, but everybody knows what their bill is. Yeah. And so people pay bills, they don't pay rates.
I want to add a little bit to that question, because there was quite a bit of conversation within the IRP committee around what that conservation goal should be. And that's one of the reasons that 2.65 megawatts was picked, because beyond that, you are going to see, a net loss of the amount of electricity that's used. And so it was determined that again, if you go back to rates, this would impact rates more than it's kind of an interesting phenomena that you can actually get to a point where you have so much conservation that it's not cost effective, and beyond that 2.65 it doesn't become cost effective. But as we move into the future with AMI and some of the other technology and conservation goals and stuff, it's possible that we can move to that at some point and make it cost effective.
My last comment is about, I've been interested in morphing our MUPD program into a green building incentive program, which is kind of what it does now, but not exactly. I'm wondering, there's a lot of stuff in here about green buildings, so I wasn't ever to fetter it out in terms of what incentives are there for incentivizing people to do LEED certified buildings, for instance, or other kinds of things like that, and that the city and EWEB could cooperate in getting that done and improving the quality of the stock of housing that we have, especially new housing, and bringing it up to LEED standards, for instance, or even higher than maybe LEED Gold or whatever. And wondering where we stand now and what's the possibility for moving that forward.
Are you asking for the
Yes, no question.
Yes. Yes, sir.
No, go ahead.
Are you asking for what the city's doing as far as green building incentives, or EWEB, or both?
Yes, both.
Both. Let somebody address EWEB while I ask our green building
cooperation
specialist to come up and answer the city side.
Clay, you want to try and tackle that, or?
Yeah. Do you want to, Clay? You go with the city one.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Introduce yourself.
Councilor Schlenk, I'm Jenna Garman, and I work in the city's Green Building Waste Prevention Program. And we've had a Green Building Incentive Program since fall of 2009. The incentives are primarily permitting incentives, so expedited permitting. We have some reduced system development charges, free meetings that normally applicants have to pay for. And then we have some very modest financial incentives that we were able to fund through the most recent ERA grants, and we matched that with some local funding. That funding is running out, so we're looking at ways that we might be able to continue that. And we work very closely with EWEB on the Green Building Incentive Program. We work with energy management staff on that, and those incentives are provided for LEED and Earth Advantage and passive house projects. So that's what we have in place from the permitting end of things.
So not that many dollars, but more expedited process. And
that's correct.
Clay Norris from EWEB, and I think Jenna kind of covered it, but we do provide some incentives for higher than code efficient buildings. So there are energy efficiency dollars available for LEED certified buildings from EWEB.
well, what's the level of that? I mean,
now you've exceeded my my knowledge base. All right.
We could get you some fuller information if you like.
Right. I'm interested in how the city and EWEB can cooperate to bolster that program and maybe create a better, bigger program that would be a asset to the city and EWEB.
Thank you. Councilor Brown?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just have a couple of quick questions. They're on attachment B, which is the summary of actions in buildings and energy. And I don't, the newly adopted REACH code is referenced, and I don't know what the REACH code is. Just have a brief explanation of how that differs from previous code.
That's at the state level. Do you mind? I'm going to let Jenna answer that one as well.
Might as well just stay right.
So the REACH code is an optional building code that is based on the International Green Construction Code, and there was Senate Bill 79 that directed the state to develop this optional code, and it has an energy target that's 15 to 20% above current building code energy standards. So the commercial code is available for applicants to opt to be considered under that code currently. The residential portion is under development, supposed to be available in October. So it's basically a pathway for new technologies to be tried out, and it's also intended, the REACH code is intended to be a predictor of where future building codes may go. So it's basically an alternative path to the current building code that has higher standards for energy efficiency.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is, just down a couple of sections below that, it says, EWEB is also soliciting business customers on the impact to them of the state BETC decred. I'm just wondering what BETC stands for.
That's the BETC. the business energy tax code.
Credit.
Credit.
I see.
It's the tax credit that the legislature decided this last session to decrease drastically. So in the past, business had relied on that tax credit to be able to fund some of their energy efficiency work. Now we're just checking in with them to sort of say, okay, you probably aren't going to get the tax credit anymore. What impact is this having on you deciding to do energy efficiency work? So we really want to just try and make sure what those gaps are, and then see if there's ways we can either address them through information or linking them up with other ways or looking at restructuring our incentives. So we just want to check in with them and see what impact it was having.
Sure, okay, great, thank you. And finally, one last question. What is a rain garden?
Do you want to say that?
Sure. Rain Garden is a stormwater management tool, and the purpose is to slow down stormwater and sometimes treat it before it hits the stormwater system. So generally it's a shallow depression that's planted with plants that are good at taking up pollutants and hopefully look attractive as well. So that's one of the stormwater management techniques that we're promoting through the Waterwise Garden.
Like a swale?
Bioswale and rain garden are similar. They're slightly different. Bioswales tend to be longer. Rain garden is a little bit more designed for residential use.
Better marketing.
Okay.
Right.
Right, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? All right, thank you very much for that presentation. Very encouraging. Thank you very much. And so now we're going to just open up the floor for any discussion on any topic that you would like with eWeb, or with us. So open up the floor to you all. Anybody?
I'd just like to bring out, if I may, Mayor, about our steam transition plan downtown and where we're going with that, and maybe ask staff to give you a 2-minute, because that's going to have a significant impact on several potential property owners downtown. Roger, would you?
So we are still on schedule to close the steam system June 2012, end of June 2012. And of course, the city and eWeb are two of the largest remaining customers. And current projections is that everybody is aware of it, and everybody is making plans to come off of steam. And there's probably a few challenges out there, but right now we're ahead of schedule in terms of the number of businesses that have come off the steam system and are making good progress. In some cases, it's been very tough financially for some organizations. In some cases, we have customers saying asking why they didn't do it years ago. So, but all in all, it's still a few challenges out there, but we'll probably be fine by June 2012.
Good to hear. Commissioner Cassidy?
Changing the subject a little bit, one of the things in your background information for this meeting was the information about a customer care program and the various millions of dollars that we put into that to help people pay their electric bills. And we all, I think that's a pretty nice thing, and it's very practical for eWeb to be doing this because we get some benefits from it too. But it is, to a large extent, a real municipal thing that's going on for the people in the community. And we are looking for ways of how we would adjust the amount of money that we would put into that program with various scales how we could cut it back. What I'm looking for is comments from the councilors, either privately or publicly, to how they see the value of this. Is it enough? Should it be a lot more? Is it tolerable to lower it? Some kind of public feedback, because you're elected by the public, as we are, and we get feedback on this kind of thing, but to get that kind of thing would be very informative for us.
And next was it? And then
So that was actually one of my issues. I think this is extremely important program, Bob. The low-income bill assistance program helps an enormous amount of people. especially in this community, and especially in these tough economic times. This is a really important thing for, I think, the EWEB board to keep at the forefront of its programs that they fund, and maybe even enhance it if you can. I know that my experience with it is that the modest amount of money that it takes in order to keep people paying their bills actually ends up paying off in the long run, in terms of them being good customers and paying their bills over the long term in terms of write-offs and things like that. So I think it's a very important program, and enhance it if you can. The other question I had was about the steam plant, so you answered that, but when's the deadline for the switch off?
June 12th.
June 12th. June 2012.
June of
June 2012.
Okay. The other question I had was about the regional water master plan, and just kind of what's the status of that, where are we heading with it? And I know that those are ongoing conversations, so.
Go ahead.
Councilor Zelenka, we continue to work with within the Metro Plan structure we've had for quite some time with our two principal partners, Springfield Utility Board and Rainbow Water District. And we approached both of them about expanding the circle into a broader discussion. And we have ongoing work there. We're really focused on the Metro Plan right now with the three partners, and no one's necessarily adverse to expanding the circle, but there's some practical limits right now. We're just trying to achieve some of the things within the Metro Plan that are already on the books. And of course, we have the City of Veneta coming in, and I'm going to be an advocate for having them join into the Metro Plan discussions as well. Really, the critical thing for EWEB going forward is looking at this in terms of our second source. We want to cooperate with our neighbors, but we also need to deal with our second source situation, and Springfield Utility Board is really the critical entity there, because they're the only ones of enough scale to really support the City of Eugene and EWEB if we were to have a water problem. And I'm going to follow up with Mr. Reese in the future about getting another meeting scheduled on that.
Yeah, because that came out of the Veneta conversation, and having a regional water master plan, I think, is a good idea, because it deals with some of those issues revolving around what happened with Veneta, and also the water rights issues, but as well all the benefits that can be had by cooperation as opposed to everybody going on their own. And of course, the second source is a huge issue for EWEB and has been forever. But hopefully by maybe next time we have a meeting, we can have a more substantive conversation about that plan and where it's going.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, Councilor Ortiz?
Thank you, Mayor. So I have a couple of comments or questions I want to ask. If staff from EWEB could talk a little bit more about the focus group for the comment that Commissioner Cassidy made around support for folks who don't have enough money, because there was a focus group that actually talked about there are different agencies that do different things, and how there was going to be a coordinated effort. If that was my understanding, can somebody share a little bit about that with the rest of the staff, with the rest of the group?
Go ahead, Commissioner Cassidy.
We did have a group, and they were focusing on the metrics that we would be using for raising or lowering it. Almost the assumption was we would be lowering the amount of aid that we would be putting into that. We raise $1 million on about roughly 75 cents a month for the typical household. We can raise $1 million. And this is the kind of thing that a lot of people don't recognize in the community. And my thought is, if it's really this good and this important kind of thing, this is a service that EWEB can do for the city kind of thing. We raise our money from a much larger, broader session of people than the city does on taxes, so that the typical household doesn't pay an awful lot for the benefit. But having some input from you on how much we should raise the rates for other people for doing this kind of thing, what is that value? What is that balance?
Roger, did you have anything to add?
I would just like to thank you personally, Councilor Ortiz, for participating on the panel that you were talking about. I think the community input was very valuable, and it did drive a really hard and important decision for the UWEB commissioners to make, and I knew that they really valued the community input from many people, including yourself. Thank you.
So I'm glad to hear you talk.
I just wanted to mention to that, too, I don't know if Janine can address this, but, I mean, for me as a commissioner, what I was looking for from that panel is, as a board, what kind of triggers we would see within the community to how much, when we should apply the Comfort Care Program, what type of programs we should apply, and how much, money we should put in there. But also, should we look to a long-term funding source for it? For now, we have a certain amount, 1.7 million, that's been in the rates for a number of years now, and then the board in the last few years has added an additional 1.1 million plus on top of that from the reserves, and we're kind of struggling with the thoughts of, do we want to long-term put that back into the rates, an additional amount, or continue to fund out of the reserve? So that was some of the things that we were looking for to come out of that panel, and again, I also thank you for being on that, and I think we're going to hear more about, what the outcome was from that. I don't know that we've actually got
There's another meeting coming up.
There's another meeting.
Thank you. Well, I'm also glad to hear about the second source water issue, because I had, heard some conversation about that, and it is kind of scary when you think about it, so I'm glad to see you're pursuing that. I just kind of wanted to know, feel the temperature around MWMC is doing recycled water, doing a study to see if that's going to be something that's going to be possible for this community. And it's in the, I don't know if the other counselors have been interviewed or not yet, but just kind of some questions being asked about it. And I was just kind of wondering if you were in on the conversation, and if recycled water, not for drinking, but for industry and for like car washes, and they cited 3. If that was, if that's in your conversation, or if that's even on your radar.
May I answer with a question? I mean, no, that's the very first I've heard of it,
Okay.
but I would assume that would apply a whole new set of water distribution lines to separate that from the drinking water and everything else. Is that not correct? And I would think that would be a huge capital expenditure, and I don't think we've talked about that.
Okay.
Now, Janine had something.
Just real quickly, early on, the MWMC staff did engage other staff in a kind of test the water and where would we focus our efforts.
Yeah.
Please. That one was
That
coming.
was pretty good.
That's very good. Well, best around.
So we did have an early conversation about different kinds of pilot programs that might work, and we have not heard back. I know they did some hiring of some marketing, and
Yeah.
so we stand by, and we have the contacts. They have our contact information, and we'll be working with them.
Great. Thank you.
Interesting, huh? Yeah. All right, so next time, Commissioner Simpson.
Thank you, Mayor Piercy. I just want to bring up just a couple random points for your thoughts. I wanted to thank the city for what I perceived over the last 5 or 6 years going here, increased coordination between EWEB and the Public Works Department. There are a lot of streets getting torn up right now as we manage our aggressive infrastructure replacement projects for getting old water pipes out of the ground and replaced with new ductile iron pipes that will carry us forward for the next 100 years. This program costs a lot of money. It's about $2.5 million thereabouts every year. We're looking out, I just saw preliminary budgets, we're looking out 5, 6, possibly 7 more years of this, and then we'll revisit it. But this process, this issue is certainly not unique to Eugene. It's you probably are aware that aging infrastructure affects the entire United States, if not the world, and it's just that everyone's 100 years old in the United States, at least on the West Coast, and that's about all these systems last. But to the Public Works point, what I mean by coordination is when Public Works needs to repave a street, now they're giving us a whole lot more advance warning so we can stage our equipment, get things budgeted instead of running around pulling budget money from one year to the next. That advance notice is extremely helpful and really helps save costs. You all know this year we're celebrating our 100th anniversary, and on March 11th we had a large celebration, and we've had multiple community outreach events all year long. They've been very positive and have really raised the awareness of eWeb throughout the community. And my temperature read there is people are very proud of eWeb and certainly proud to live in the city of Eugene, and we're all in that together. And on that note, you all probably know I'm involved with the Sister City program. So a delegation is coming to town on Friday, and on Tuesday, they're visiting with Mayor Piercy, and right after that, they're taking a tour of the eWeb's water filtration plant. And that's at 10:15, and you're certainly invited to attend or come along with that. Bring your attention to this van in the lower left-hand corner. eWeb just bought that electric van to deliver mail and packets. It's our courier van, and it gets, there's no gasoline in it. It can go 80 miles on one charge, and it's been serving us really well now for the last, I think, just 2 or 3 weeks. It was in the parade. So if you see it, honk and wave and take a look at the graphics. I'm sure our driver will love that. And once a year we try to get out and have a board meeting in Leebird. That's because we have many electrical customers up in that area, in part due to our generation facilities up in that area. The folks who are served are not represented. They don't vote for us, and so that's one of our ways of reaching out to that community. So we'll be having that meeting on the 20th at the Leebird Fire Training Center, and you're certainly all welcome to join that too, if you'd like. Thanks.
Thank you. Betty, you're next.
Oh, thank you. I had a comment about the helping people with their electric bills, their utility bills. We are all concerned with people who are homeless, and I think, and we should be concerned with the ones who might become homeless just as much. And I think that utility bills are a contributing factor to people becoming homeless, especially when you charge big fees for being late, and a fee for reconnecting if people get disconnection notices, and then they have to pay to reconnect. And it's just one of the many ways in which people who are poor have everything conspiring to make them more poor. It's once you're poor, everything costs more. And I have another concern, which is some of you have heard about, but a family that takes in another family that would be homeless if they weren't taken in, then is using a lot of power, and they start getting disconnect notices because they can't pay. And yet the original homeowner, has maybe wages that are too high to qualify for help, and that's a big problem. But I wonder if you could do anything about the reconnecting fees.
I would just like to speak to the homeless family moving in with the other family. That's that goes back to having that panel meeting, the committees to get a better understanding of what type of comfort care programs eWeb should be dealing with, and that could even be one that we could be looking at because we already added the staff and the board added some additional programs to the comfort care program around people that were recently laid off. And things like that, where before it used to be traditionally people that just couldn't pay their bill. Now there's all sorts of reasons that are taken into account, and maybe that would be something that the staff and the board could look at as an additional program within the comfort care program.
Thanks.
Councilor Taylor, both the late fee that was initiated and the disconnect charges that we use are tools that the utilities historically had and has recently changed for the late fee. But I think the most important thing we do to avoid those is not change the fees, but it's the entire community care and customer care program, and that was why the level of the fees and the triggers for what we do, it's really to support the customers that need that help it's not really that they can't pay their bill on time or anything. It's that they can't pay their bill at all, and that's why the commissioners decided to keep the 2012 program at the same level as the 2011, because the panel feedback as well as management staff feedback was we need these programs, and they're going to be critical to keeping people their service on. And it's much more cost effective for all customers in the end, as I think as Councilor Zelenka pointed out, for us to not have to turn people off, because what happens is then we have a public issue and a community issue and a personal issue, but we also have write-offs. We can, so that in some respects, I'd rather see us fund the customer care program as go to having write-offs as well as turn-offs. So what we're really looking forward in the future, and the commissioners have really asked for us, what's the program design? Where do we need to take this? And is the program designed, not just so the dollars adequate, but is the design adequate to address the kinds of situations that you raise?
Thank you.
So at the risk of being punny, I'd say, don't write off people or you'll turn them off. No. Okay.
Write-offs are a turn-off.
I know. Chris, you're next.
Far too much fun. Thanks. That was a powerful statement.
Yes. We could go on.
We could go. I'll stop there. And just to add my voice to the question you were asking about what was our reaction, the first thing I would say is to thank you in a very heartfelt way for the amount of money you've already put into that care program. I think it's been tremendous, and I would probably say it would be a difficult time to cut back or eliminate that program, because right now, with the way things are, for a lot of people, paying their utility bill is one of those key tipping point components that can make their home no longer affordable, or can put them into a situation where they can no longer make ends meet. Food, child care, medical care, and utilities. I mean, those are the key ones. And so maintaining that program as much as you possibly can, I would say, benefits the entire community. I would support putting as much into it as you can. As you may or may not know, the Budget Committee, when it last met, was talking about human service funding and the challenge we all have in meeting the tremendous human service need. And the mayor and the council is forming a subcommittee to look at what are the opportunities for us to try to figure out ways to pay for human services. I don't know if there might be efficiencies in eWeb and the city talking about things, since we both have a similar interest, obviously, in figuring out ways to help people, in whatever that need might be, whether it's around utility, where you might be helpful, or in other areas. I don't know. There may be opportunities for conversation when we get into that subcommittee to talk about ways where we might work together. And I think we have to be willing to step up, particularly right now. I know I talked to the folks over at the county and Human Services, and the last thing they would like to see, would see eWeb beginning to cut back, because they've already cut back. And if we just add our voice to everyone else cutting back, that means more and more people are not able to meet those critical defining costs in their lives. So everything that's been said, I congratulate you for doing it, and I'd like to see you do as much as you can.
That has been my big concern, too. It's primarily it's for renters. When they're behind on their rent, sometimes the landlord leaves them in there for a little bit, but once those lights go out, they're out of there, and they're standing on the corner with their cardboard signs. So the concern is, how much should we put into that? We talk about how much should we put into conservation, and we do a lot of that. How effective is what we're doing? We know it's nice stuff, we see incidents, but are we throwing too much money at it, or should we be putting more? That's the kind of thing that I would like to get more practical input from the community, and I appreciate your comments.
Maybe that could be a part of our conversation as we look at it in a broader sense, so that I would invite...
I just want to say, Commissioner Pryor, I want to make it clear that there's been no board discussion of cutting that amount back at this point.
But opportunities to work together, maybe we can see what can develop.
I'd also just suggest that if there are specific questions that you would like the council to respond to, I think you could formulate those and pass them over, and people could respond to those after they have the opportunity to really think about it and be able to do it in a thoughtful way. But they'd really like to understand specifically what you're looking for. And if we can be helpful with that, I think we'd like to do that.
I'd just like to throw something out there then for people to think about is EWEB, has their customer care program, but on EWEB's bill, it's not just EWEB's bill, it's also the City of Eugene and the Metropolitan Wastewater Treatment Plant. And so maybe we should look more towards a collaborative effort that everyone participates in that comfort care program, and it doesn't just all fall on EWEB's shoulders.
So Pat, and then John.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Taylor, I'm glad you brought that up about how close some people are to losing their homes and ending up with the cardboard signs on the corner, and how really lights are the basic service. Lights and heat are the basic service. Recently, this council approved $200,000 or so subsidy for people who have equity in their homes, covering an assessment that they were being assessed. These weren't people who were on the verge of losing their homes. And we do have people who are on the verge of losing their homes that we need to certainly take care of. And it seems a shame that we don't look at the larger picture. You mentioned the EWEB bill being more than just EWEB. It's the City of Eugene and Metropolitan Wastewater. Looking at the larger picture and seeing how our actions in one area can certainly affect the people who are living at the very closest to the edge of losing the basic needs in life. Very critical. I'm glad, Councilor Till, that you brought that up, and I do agree with you. Also, the other thing that I actually wanted to mention, Mr. Gray, is that you'd said that you are planning to get with City Manager John Rees regarding the regional water master plan and potentially a future meeting surrounding the progress or the process of the regional water master plan. I'd like to encourage that we do that sooner than later. We're talking about ductile pipes lasting 100 years. The regional water plan is something we have to look at it right now, because it's going to be something that if we wait until it's something we have to act upon, then we won't have the time to look at it judiciously. So the regional water master plan is something that's really important. It's probably a legacy that we will have more than even the city hall. Is what do we do with the regional water master plan? What do we do with second source for EWEB's water supply? So I would like to encourage that we do that sooner than later, and look more at how do we support outlying communities. Policy 5 in the growth management policies has been cited as a way for the City of Eugene to more or less control how outlying communities can grow. It was actually talked about regarding specifically water to Bonita, and I think a larger discussion, making sure that we understand what Policy 5 means to supporting outlying communities in the very basic need, which I believe is water. Thank you very much.
Wrap up our conversation, but because of some of the discussion we've just had, I guess what I would say is that each of us has our sort of purview, and each of us shares part of that purview with others. And so what I would say is that, we've taken major steps to make sure we keep our library open and available to people especially through these hard times. Parks are likewise. We've trying to keep the Egan centers open. We're trying to make sure that the Buckley House stays open. So there are many, many ways we're addressing the same sort of financial difficulties that we're all facing wherever we are, and they're a drain and difficult for all of us, but we're talking about the needs of our whole community and what we can all do together. So that conversation will continue, and we'll really try to find solutions and really understand the different roles we all have and what we can do within those roles. So thank you, and we celebrate your anniversary, and really, I've said this when you've come, not when we've met all together, but before, but it bears saying many times, any credit we get for being a green city, any credit we get for sustainability rests largely in part of the work that EWEB does, and we know that, and we could not be the city we are without you. So we are very, very grateful for the work that you do, and grateful to be partners with you. So thank you all very, very much, and I'll City Council works it up.
All adjourned in Eugene Water Electric Board.
And then I think we're going to have a little birthday celebration, and before we go, have some cake. perhaps we can do one embarrassing round of happy birthdays.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear John. Happy birthday to you. Thank you very much.
Wow, that was way better.
Y'all can get up and go back and get some.
Well, when he said we're all 100 years old, I felt it.
Hey!